Thank you so much for having me. This panel is about the Middle East, and we are really lucky today to have a couple of experts on the Middle East to walk us through some tough issues. First, we have Congressman Seth Moulton. He joined the Marine Corps in 2001. He served 4 tours in Iraq before using the GI Bill to go to college, and spent a couple of years in private industry before being called back to service, but this time in the halls of Congress. He's been there serving as a Democratic congressman from Massachusetts for about a decade now. I just changed your job there a little bit, you know.
That's all right.
You can make an announcement right here if you want. Just kidding. Serves on the House Armed Services Committee and was selected to sit on the Select Committee on Strategic Competition between the U.S. and China. Congressman, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
And then we have retired General Frank McKenzie. He's been the executive director of the University of South Florida's Global and National Security Institute since May of 2022, literally starting there just days after retiring from the Marine Corps after 42 years in service. His most recent assignment there was as commanding general of U.S. Central Command. I am not going to go through all of your tours at CENTCOM or all of the time that you spent in the Middle East, but I can tell you it was a substantial amount of time that he spent in the region. He's definitely an expert on it. He's also serving as a fellow or a member of a number of different institutions, including the executive director of Cyber Florida, distinguished senior fellow at the Middle East Institute and the National Security Advisory Council, and a bunch more. General, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I feel like the Middle East, there are so many issues, and I really struggled to work through them all. But I feel like we have to start with the Houthis. And that is because it is this ongoing military campaign that the U.S. is waging against the Houthi rebels in Yemen. But the reality is the American people know very little about what's actually going on there. For a long time, CENTCOM, since the activity really kicked up with the Houthis in November of 2023, CENTCOM was putting out near daily reports about what the Houthis were doing, what the U.S. was doing to counter the Houthis. But since this current campaign started on March 15th, we've gotten virtually zero information, beyond very vague statements like the U.S. is striking day and night, every single day, day and night, and repeated claims that it's extremely successful. General McKenzie, I'm hoping that we can draw on your vast knowledge of the region and the Houthis and Iran, and maybe there are some nuances that you're able to see through the little bit of information that we've gotten that you can give us a sense of how you think this current military campaign against the Houthis is going.
Sure. So, Courtney, first of all, it's great to be here. I'm honored to be here at the Sedona and be part of the McCain Institute. It's just a great experience. I spent a little bit of time in Arizona, down in Yuma, considerably different in a lot of ways from where we are here today. But I'm just honored to be here today. I think the thing that first you begin when you think about the current campaign against the Houthis. This was something that, to quote an old Neil Young song, should have been done long ago. Yeah. We had an opportunity to do this in probably the winter of 2023 when these activities first began. It would have been a far easier campaign at that period of time. But we've waited now, and the Houthis have grown strength. They've gotten far more sophisticated in their attacks. They've had the opportunity to build up their arsenal. And so now it is a far more difficult problem. And the other thing that we should consider is this is not an action that's being undertaken to defend Israel. This is an action that's being undertaken because the United States is the premier maritime nation in the world today. We have a vested interest in free passage of goods on the high seas. By closing the Bab el-Mandeb, which the Houthis have done, they have been able to close the Suez Canal, which is of significance to us. Now, not a huge amount of our commerce goes through there, but you draw a precedent from it. Other people in other parts of the world are looking to gain lessons from this. So it's very much in our, I would argue, in our national interest to open this strait. So the current campaign continues. Too soon to tell if it's going to be successful or not. The objectives of the campaign should be one of two cases. Either you convince the Houthis to stop. In other words, you establish deterrence by convincing them it's more painful to continue to strike than to do the other. Or second, you reduce their ability to do so they're no longer a factor. The second case is harder to obtain than the first. Both are probably obtainable. These operations are continuing. I read about them as you do. I don't know much more than you do. But I think it's still too early to tell. We may need to actually consider alternatives to help air power in this operation. There are proxy groups that can operate on the ground against the Houthis. There are a variety of things we could do to further carry this attack to a higher level if it becomes necessary to do this. I don't believe Central Command or the Department of Defense ever saw this as a short-term operation. Really? They recognized it was going to take some time, not going to be done in a night or a week or maybe even a month. but I believe that we can do it. We just need to stick with it.
Proxy groups on the ground, but no U.S. boots on the ground for that?
Who knows? We've had success working proxies with other nations, but also with our forces. I wouldn't leave any alternative off the table. That's a bad thing to do, to narrow yourself in advance. So I hope we're considering all those alternatives as we look at the campaign and how it's continuing.
Congressman, one of the things that we do know is that the U.S. has gone after well over 1,000 targets since March 15th. That's the most substantial piece of information we've gotten. Now, 1,000 targets could be 3,000 strikes for all we know, because we don't know exactly what those targets are. Believe me, the press corps has been asking, I can tell you. In that time, the Houthis have also been able to shoot down 7 MQ-9 drones, at least, that we know of. Yesterday, they fired some missiles at Israel that had to be intercepted. The airspace over large parts of Yemen continues to be contested. So we're talking at least 1,000 targets, again, probably thousands of munitions expended here, and the Houthis are still contesting the airspace. Is what we are seeing right now a success?
Well, Courtney, first of all, thank you. It's an honor to be here with you. It's an honor to be here with a Marine who's not only done a lot more in the Middle East than I have, but a lot more in the Marine Corps. And it's a great honor to be here in Arizona, where I would mention that Marines seem to be doing pretty well in politics lately. No offense to the former Navy veteran. But I think this is a really important question, because it's not even just a question of whether our current plan is working. I would, by the way, add to your list the fact that the USS Harry Truman had to turn due to evasive maneuvers so dramatically that they lost an F-18 off the side. Now, this was apparently to avoid a missile, just open press reporting. I mean, look, if an F-18 was flying and had to make evasive maneuvers to avoid a missile, and as a result, for some reason, the pilot had to eject, we would say we lost an F-18 too. So, I mean, this is not really going that well, but it's also not gone well for a while, because Saudi and the UAE were essentially doing the same sort of campaign with our planes, our bombs, and our intelligence, and it hasn't solved the problem. So first of all, I would just ask whether military pressure alone is gonna work. And to General McKenzie's point, you know, there are limits to what you can do with air power. That's why I had a job for a few years in Iraq. The second point I would make is I do think it's worth asking the question, is this really so strategically important to us that we need to expend these resources? Because a lot of shipping companies right now, they've just baked in the fact that their journeys are gonna take 9 more days, they're gonna go around. I would argue that the country that is most invested in the Suez Canal is actually Egypt. Like, let's get them to step up to the plate. Maybe they're in a better position to find more of a diplomatic than military solution, which ultimately might be more successful. So I think there is a question. I mean, ironically, you know, this was a question raised, a non-logistical question, by the way, in the Signal chat by Lance Corporal Vance when he, sorry, Vice President Vance, you know, broken clock can
just
be
had
right
to get that
twice
in
a
there.
day. And I actually think, to his credit, it deserves some examination. And the third point I would make is that there is a serious consequence to this, which is that we're using very sophisticated weapons, very expensive missiles, in part because the Houthis do have an effective anti-air capability. So we can't just, you know, hover over targets and drop dumb bombs. And those are things we really need in the Pacific. Yeah. So when you look holistically about where the Middle East fits into our broader global strategy, using a lot of weapons, to the Admiral's point about magazine depth, is not great. And getting bogged down in the Middle East in a place where we could find ourselves in a place where we're using ground troops, that's not great either.
Do you actually think that's a possibility? Because I know U.S. boots on the ground have been mentioned more and more in the context of trying to figure out exactly how much these strikes are actually degrading the Houthis. Because the U.S. has like very little sense of the battle damage assessment right now.
Right.
And they keep putting drones up to take a look, and the Houthis keep shooting them down.
Well, I would have said no until 90 seconds ago when the general mentioned that to go there. So, I mean, I just, I think the point is that when you really look strategically about where does the Middle East fit in our global strategy, I think the worst thing that we could possibly do for deterring China is get bogged down in a war in the Middle East.
You can't talk about the Houthis without talking about their primary backer, which of course is Iran. It seems as if Iran is still providing them with weapons, money, intelligence, it looks like still. Israeli strikes in October severely crippled the air defense systems in Iran, taking out most of their S-300s, or at least severely disabling them. Experts think it'll be months, if not a couple of years, before all of their systems are back online. General McKenzie, you know Iran. I'm sure you don't have to answer this, but I think we all know the answer. That you probably were directly involved in plans that exist somewhere that we aren't allowed to look at about what it actually looks like to go after the nuclear. So can you walk us through as much about that as you can? What will it actually look like if the U.S. were to decide to take strikes against Iran? I mean, are we talking days? What are some of the second and third order effects? Anything you can share?
Sure. So let me just begin broadly. Iran is the weakest they've been in many decades. They were embarrassed by the ineffectiveness of the two attacks they launched on Israel, and they were embarrassed by the effectiveness of the Israeli attack that stripped a lot of their air defense, not all of their air defense, but a lot of their air defense away, particularly some of the S-300s that you referenced. So they've been very embarrassed by that. But moreover, they've been embarrassed by the collapse of Lebanese Hezbollah, which when I was the CENTCOM commander, the thing I worried about the most was an attack on Israel from Lebanon launched by Lebanese Hezbollah. They had far more missiles than Iran at far closer range, and those missiles were very precise and very lethal. That capability, which was Iran's huge hedge against Israel, is now gone. Israel has decapitated LH. They have actually done a series of precise strikes that has taken most of those missiles out of play. So that was the big hedge for Iran. That no longer exists. Additionally, 2024 ended with the disaster for Iran in Syria. Bashar Assad fell, one of their strong allies in the region, the land bridge, if you will, to get weapons into Lebanon to fight against Israel, collapsed as well. Those two things were profoundly significant. So Iran finds themselves now on their back foot in a very, very bad place. The only thing that's going well for them, really, what's going on with the Houthis. And there's a link there. We can argue about how close that link is, but there's a link there. But the Houthis aren't going to threaten Israel. Israelis are going to be very successful in intercepting those attacks on the Houthis by and large. But we've already talked about that, so let's get back to Iran. So Iran's situation right now is they're weak, they're vulnerable. They know that. They are susceptible to negotiation when they're pressed. There's history of this. In 1987, Supreme Leader Khomeini did a thing that's known in Iranian statecraft as drinking from the poison chalice when he signed a truce with Iraq to bring an effective end to the Iran-Iraq war, which most Americans don't know anything about, but it cost millions of lives, largest employment of chemical weapons since World War I, a disaster of a war across the region. But Iran sought peace because the regime was threatened. Iran will react if the regime is threatened. I say all of this simply to make the point we have a rare opportunity in the region to put pressure on Iran. And so when we talk about putting pressure on Iran, we really mean first their nuclear program. Now my view of Iran's a little different than many. I actually don't believe Iran wants to possess a nuclear weapon. I believe Iran wants to be able to possess a nuclear weapon. They want to flirt with breakout so that they can cause us to dance to their tune. Sanctions relief, us, the Europeans. They know that if they ever cross that line, first of all, Iran can't keep it a secret. We'll know if they cross that line. And they will be a nuclear state, but they'll have a test article. They won't have a deliverable weapon. It'll take them months to build a deliverable weapon. They're not going to drive it to Tel Aviv in a truck. So they're going to have to, and they'll have to build a rocket that'll get it there, which they don't have, and they'll have to develop the technology that will allow that weapon to enter the atmosphere at theater depth and stay cool and explode. So a lot of technical issues ahead of Iran right now, which is why I don't think they've made that decision. Now that could change based on the current situation, but I don't believe Iran has made the decision to pursue a nuclear weapon. So Do we want, so, Israel talks about striking them right now. We talk about it. The Iranian nuclear program, while not across the Rubicon yet, is a large, complex target. It's easy to talk about striking it. You're right. I know a little bit about that target. And it's not one target, it's many targets. And it would be a difficult proposition. You're not going to do it in one period of darkness, as we would say. You're going to have to go back and revisit it if you want to do that. So I think, let me just sort of sum it up. Iran is weak right now. I think we all want Iran not to possess a nuclear weapon. We would like to see that program turned in a way that allows us to have some assurance that they're not going to pursue a nuclear weapon. I would argue the best way to do that remains a diplomatic process with force behind it. Because in the region, you always have to have force behind you if your diplomats are going to be successful. And I would just close by saying the one thing this current administration has is they have credibility on this issue. They have credibility for three reasons. First, because Donald Trump killed Qasem Soleimani. And we don't remember that much in the United States. Believe me, the Iranians remember it. And they respect that action. They don't like it, but they respect that the fact that he took that action. The second thing is the Abraham Accord opened Israel into the region. That door opens and shuts by degrees, but it's open. It's more open than it's been in a long time. And the third thing that President Trump did was he made a decision to bring Israel into the Central Command region from the European Command region. And that has allowed much of the success you've seen over the last few months in defending Israel to occur. So I would argue, and I'll finish here, we have a rare opportunity here. And we want to keep it diplomatic. I don't think President Trump wants to go to war with Iran. I really don't believe that. But you have to press that if you want to get Iran to make concessions. We have an opportunity to do this right now, and I'll stop there.
Congressman, do you agree with that? I mean, today was supposed to be the fourth round of talks but they were delayed. The Omani foreign minister said it was for logistical and technical reasons, but we haven't really gotten a sense of exactly what that means. But do you actually think there is a chance for diplomacy with Iran right now? There are some people who think that the talks are just all for show.
I do think there's a chance. I think it's harder because we're a lot closer to breakout than we were under the JCPOA or before the JCPOA, right? So to get a stronger deal than the JCPOA, which is what the Trump administration has set as the bar, is not going to be easy. But I totally agree with the general. It's the preferred course of action, and given how weak Iran is, really historically weak, certainly in my lifetime, it is a tremendous opportunity. So rather than repeat all the things that he said that I agree with, let me just add a couple of points. I think one of the questions that all the proponents of military strikes never ask is not just how hard will it be, how many bombs will it take, or how long will it take, but I think most importantly, how hard will it be for Iran to reconstitute once that's done? Because maybe they don't want to make a bomb now, but they probably will if we take out their program. And I think that's a really important question to ask, and there are estimates about that. Can't cite them here, but they're not terribly encouraging.
So you actually think that a strike against Iran's nuclear facilities would only push them into the decision of actually making a bomb?
I think that's a huge risk. I don't think we know for sure, but I think it's a huge risk. And unless we want to be bombing them every 6 months, that could be a real problem. So, of course, the irony is that all these people who said, it's crazy that we have a deal, this is never going to work through negotiations, we need to pull out of the JCPOA, and then when Biden was suggesting that we should negotiate a deal, we're completely opposed to it. Basically every Republican in Congress, now every Republican in Congress is supportive of Trump negotiating a deal. Leaving that irony aside, I do think it's a good course of action. I think it's what we should pursue. And again, come back to this point that the last thing we want in the Middle East when we look at our global challenges is to get bogged down there in a war.
There was I read quite a bit of what Senator McCain said about the Middle East over the years to prepare for this panel. And by the way, he said a lot about Iran. There was a lot of reading about Iran. But the one consistent message was exactly what you both have said here, which is Iran cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. I just kind of wonder, though, you've laid out, General McKenzie, this weakened Iran, their air defenses are down. There's no question that Israel is looking to potentially do something there. Do you think there's an argument to be made that if the diplomacy doesn't work and kind of work fast while their systems are still down and they're rebuilding, is there an argument to be made that a strike against Iran is kind of now or never?
So Seth actually hit a very good point. I do know a lot about this. When I first began to study the problem in 2010, the Iranian nuclear target was vastly different than the target that presents itself in the spring of 2025. it would be difficult to do away completely with the Iranian nuclear program, no matter what we did to it. That ship has sailed. We had the opportunity to do this a decade or more ago, and successive administrations chose not to address it when it was far more manageable than where we face it right now. So I think we just got to consider that as you look at striking the Iranian target. You're probably not going to be completely satisfied with the result that you get. You are going to almost certainly have to revisit it. And then, of course, you open the floodgate. Look, Iran has had little success in attacking Israel. Israel's a long way from Iran. There's a lot of strategic depth there. They would have far more success if they attacked Saudi Arabia or UAE, and we have to consider both those possibilities as well. And so when we think about striking Iran, we've always considered the possibility that Iran would choose, as a response, to widen the war across the theater. And that's something that I think you've got to really think about very hard before you commit to a course of action like this.
Yeah, I totally agree. And just one other point too, which is that when you look at these options, military strikes, Netanyahu seems to want that option. Trump's certainly considering it. There are people in his administration who clearly want it, versus the diplomatic approach. Look, the elephant in the room is that we want regime change in Iran. That's where we want to get eventually. And military strikes empower the hardliners. Successful diplomacy empowers the people who might actually be the architects of regime change.
I forgot to also mention we are going to take questions at the end. So if you have any questions, or if you have something while we're talking about the topic, just wave and get my attention. We heard from Cindy McCain at the lunch, and her comments were really striking to me, I imagine to a lot of you as well, specifically that not an ounce of food has been delivered in Gaza since March 2nd, so 2 months, and that, I mean, there's been some press reporting about this, that the NGOs have basically run out of all their food, and she confirmed that there is just food, medicine is dwindling, if not non-existent anymore. Congressman, I want to ask you a little bit about that. Since Israel shut down all the crossings into Gaza, they've also restarted their military campaign there, ending their 2-month-long or so ceasefire with Hamas. There are innocent people who are suffering there every single day, kids, innocent Palestinians. What can the Trump administration do, if anything, to help the people in Gaza?
Well, look, I think that the fundamental problem here is that Israel has a right to defend itself. The attacks on October 7th were heinous. They need to get rid of Hamas. We should all agree on that. We cannot have Palestinians governed by an organization that has the destruction of Israel written into its charter. So I think it's really important that at a fundamental level, Israel wins this war. But the problem is that their strategy is not working. And if you look at Netanyahu's strategy, it's really 3 things. 1, to destroy Hamas. After 2 years, he's only succeeded in degrading them. They're actually being quite successful with recruiting new adherents. Yeah. Number 2, make sure Hamas is not governing. Hamas is still governing. And then number 3, get the hostages back, and we don't have all the hostages back. You know, I would argue, and I was talking to General Petraeus about this, so I give him credit for this conversation as well, that the 4th component, as I've sort of said from day one, just based on my experience in Iraq, is you need to have a successful counterinsurgency campaign that actually helps the Palestinians at the end of the day. And that's not on Netanyahu's agenda. My argument is that it should be on his agenda if he wants to win. So the fundamental issue is not just that, the Palestinians are suffering. Of course they are. We don't want Israelis to suffer again as they did on October 7th. But if you agree that we need to get rid of Hamas, the strategy isn't working.
General, what happens with Gaza?
Sure. So Israel, as they look at their strategic situation, they got to be happy with Lebanon. They got to be happy with Syria. They've got to be relatively satisfied with what's happened with Iran. They can't be happy with the Gaza situation. Mm-hmm. And you go back to the very beginning. If you're going to have a plan, you need to have an end state. You need to understand what it's supposed to look like at the end. And it's never been clear to me what that is, unless you want to fight there forever. And I think the only people who actually want to fight forever is Hamas. So I think, you need to, and I would argue all the time, you need to have some form of end state that actually provides for some form of governance, for self-governance for the Palestinians. And when I say that, my friends in Israel laugh at me and say, I don't understand the problem. I appreciate that. But I think you have to give them something. There has to be some survival, some form of sovereignty at the end of it. And a lot of ways to get to that. We don't have to go back to the Oslo Accords. We can examine other alternatives. But I see no way that doesn't involve that. And, there's a role for the Arab states to play here. I think it does ideally need to be an Arab solution, not a Western solution. And we'll see what happens. But it's the one area, if you were doing the campaigns that Israel is conducting right now, that's the one, I think, where they've got to be the most worried.
From a military perspective, Israel right now is where we were in about 2005, 2006 in Iraq, right? In big bases, clear, hold, leave, not clear, hold, build, or arguably not even hold, clear, leave, right? And we had a very different strategy during the surge that not only involved actually building governance, but surging humanitarian aid with the idea that, sure, some of it would get taken by the insurgents, but we want to show that we're the good guys in town and we want to win allegiance more than Hamas.
It just feels like the American people and the world at large have just become so numb to the fact that there are people suffering and dying in Gaza every single day that it's not even really talked about as much as it was. Congressman, I want to go back to something that you said a little bit ago, and you were talking about how the challenges in the Asia Pacific. You've said many times that the biggest national security challenge or threat right now is China. We're watching the Pentagon right now move assets, a couple of Patriot air defense systems, out of the Asia Pacific into the Middle East. And I wonder, does that concern you? It seems counter to the national security imperatives or strategy out of the Trump administration. And are you worried that the US is taking their eye off the ball with China while they are so focused on the Middle East right now?
I mean, yes, it's important to me. We only get 5 minutes in hearings with our top generals. General McKenzie is grateful for that. But that means we have to be very judicious about what questions we've asked. And I've asked this question of top leaders in the Middle East twice. Actually, no, once, sorry, Asia Pacific and Middle East, because I think it's really concerning. And again, it gets back to the big picture strategy here, where we can't get bogged down in the Middle East. Now, a good friend of mine is a former Iraqi ambassador to America. Every time I see him, he reminds me, Seth, you may try to forget about the Middle East, but the Middle East will not forget about you. It is fundamentally, though, an economy of force measure. How do we continue to invest in the Middle East? Because we can't afford for it to get out of hand. And we can talk more about opportunities there, but I would argue we're not taking advantage of some opportunities. Like, for example, we basically have no seat at the table whatsoever in Syria, with a generational opportunity to influence the new government, right? But those kinds of things we can do diplomatically ultimately frees up the military resources, especially these high-end missiles that we can't emphasize enough are needed in the Pacific.
The Congressman mentioned Syria. It's been about 5 months since the Assad regime fell. What do we know so far about this new government? I mean, what are you seeing there?
So I think we see a tremendous opportunity that's fleeting, and unless we grasp it, Iran's going to be back in there. The Russians are not going to leave. They're going to keep some presence in Syria, which I don't think we need to get particularly spun up about. But I do think I would argue that now is the time to establish some form of recognition with the current government in Syria. You have to do business with all kinds of people if you're going to be a global power. We have the opportunity now to do business with an entity, with a state that might actually bring a sense of order to a place that's been without it for a long time under what's happened to Syria for many decades under the Assad family. So I think we have an opportunity here, but it will be fleeting unless we grasp it. We're going to lose it.
You're not concerned about Russia keeping their naval base at Tartus?
I'm not concerned about that at all. We know where they are then.
Yeah.
Kilos in the Eastern Med. We're going to know where they are. We won the Cold War with those guys there. I think we can probably struggle through it here. So, and Russia has its own problems actually trying to supply it.
Yeah.
So we should remember that, sometimes it's good to have your opponent in a place where you know he is. They're up in a sack in the end, way in the Eastern Med, shallow water. not where I'd put submarines particularly, but the Russians can do as they wish.
That's fair.
I questioned a State Department official recently about whether this administration is doing anything to engage with the new Syrian government other than just give them a freebie, which is we're taking out our troops. And the State Department official said, no, that's not fair. We've had these 2 or 3 engagements or whatever. And I said, well, let's review the dates of those engagements. They were all under the Biden administration. So there really is just a complete lack of interest, and we're giving up, as the general said, a huge opportunity.
And why take U.S. troops out now? That's another thing that hasn't gotten a lot of attention, but there's like 2,600 or so U.S. troops there now. I know they don't admit all of them, but we all know that's how many are there. And they're going to drop them down to like 500 or 600. I mean, that's a huge decrease.
Great question, Courtney. I don't know what those plans are, but I do know this. Our SDF partners, our Syrian Democratic Front partners, our Kurdish allies, and some others as well, they sit on top of a prison structure in eastern Syria that has thousands of hardened ISIS fighters in it. Mm-hmm. We don't sit on top of it. We train the SDF people that do. If we need to balance that if we pull back, because if we leave, the SDF are probably going to have to turn north to face Turkey, and that's going to uncover that. It's also going to uncover the Al-Hol refugee camp, which is a poster child, if you will, for displaced persons, and the risk to at-risk populations there. Mm-hmm. So all those things go in play if you withdraw. We can certainly adjust. I don't know what their plans are. I just don't know. I'm not privy to that anymore. I would think long and hard before completely withdrawing from Syria. A drawdown, maybe not necessarily a bad thing, but I think we still have a vested interest in preventing the resurgence of ISIS, which will almost certainly occur if the SDF come off these camps and if our support for them goes away.
Let me just add that the troops in Syria are not just important for Syria, but for Iraq as well. I mean, in Iraq can either be an avenue, a highway from Iran into Israel and the rest of the Middle East, or it can be a block. Right? And we have a very serious interest. I'm biased because I'm an Iraq war veteran. I want to see Iraq succeed, but we just have a very strategic interest in making sure that Iraq is on side. Because of the pressure on Hezbollah and the other Iranian proxies, there actually has been some real progress just in the last several weeks in the Iraqi government convincing some of these militias to move towards them and away from Iran. But we need to take advantage of that. And part of the argument for having these troops in Syria is so that they can conduct operations in northern Iraq as well. I don't think that's something we want to give up right now.
I'm curious, when you questioned the State Department official about engagement with the new government in Syria, did they say they were, oh yeah, we're about to do that, that's coming up any day soon?
I think it was very clear that from the sort of traditional hands of the State Department, they recognize they need to be doing this, but also very clear that there was no guidance from the administration.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be a policy about Syria right now in the administration that's been articulated. Okay, I screwed up. We've only got 7 minutes left, and I haven't taken any questions yet. Do you have any? Because I got a lot more. Okay, I saw yours first.
Thank you very much, Ishan Thurur of the Washington Post. Question to you, both the Congressman and the General. Both the Trump administration and the Biden administration kind of see the prospect of Israeli-Saudi normalization as this kind of magical key for the region. The idea being that if Israel and Saudis, form some kind of alliance, usually probably with a lot of American sweeteners, that solves a lot of American problems strategically going forward. Of course, the Saudis have now said and have been saying for a while that this is not going to happen given the prevailing status quo with the Palestinians. And when you have an Israeli government that includes prominent members explicitly calling for ethnic cleansing in Gaza and even in the West Bank, it doesn't look like they're going to be meeting the kind of expectations of the Arab states. So where do we go from here? Is this really the panacea that Americans should be pushing for in the months and years to come? Or is it a delusion that should be abandoned? And just a small little asterisk to what you said, Courtney, you mentioned that Americans have grown numb to the suffering in Gaza. I would say it's even more than that. It's almost risky to talk about the suffering in Gaza. You're seeing, a legal resident put in deportation proceedings for writing an op-ed about what's happening in Gaza. So
that's a fair
I would like to just flag that.
Normalization, as the president prepares to travel there too, to Saudi Arabia.
Sure. So look, I remain of the view that normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia is inevitable in the long term. There may be significant bumps on the road in the short term. I don't dispute that. But I believe it's inevitable because I believe ultimately Saudi Arabia views Iran as an existential threat, perhaps the existential threat. and in order to prepare to defend themselves against Iran, even an Iran in a region in which there's a lower U.S. presence, I think the requirement to cooperate with Israel becomes even more important. So I still am of the view that in the long run, the arc is towards this. I do not discount any of the things you're talking about the short-term messaging that we see out there, but I think normalization of ties, not only with Saudi, but with other Arab nations, is going to be inevitable over the long haul.
And at the risk of stating the obvious, it's a good thing if that's the case. But the great deal maker himself should know that there's a difference between just having a deal, nice handshake, and having a deal where you actually do things for each other. So there's a big difference between just, say, normalizing relations and actually getting Saudi, for example, to contribute to stabilizing Gaza.
Great. More questions? Mr. Abrams?
Hi, Elliot Abrams, Council on Foreign Relations. On Gaza, it seems that one of the ways Hamas has stayed alive for a year and a half is with the food aid. That is, it has seized a lot of the food aid. It has used it for its own people and has sold significant quantities of it to pay its troops and others. So if you're just saying, Israel should continue to do that, it seems to me you're not helping with a solution to Hamas.
But you weren't listening, because that's not just what I'm saying. I'm saying Israel needs to clear and hold. And if they held the territory, they would be able to prevent Hamas, which currently holds the territory, from doing exactly what you described. So the issue is the strategy, right? Part of the strategy is surging humanitarian aid, in my opinion, based on my experience in Iraq. But part of the strategy is also not clear and leave, which is what Israel has been doing.
And that's a formula for Israeli occupation of Gaza semi-permanently, no?
I would argue it doesn't need to. I mean, we are not still in Iraq. I don't think it has to be permanent. I think it has to be present until you establish a functioning alternative government.
Sean?
Hi, I'm Sean Van Diver from Afghan EVAC. Really great discussion today. I would be remiss if I was in a room with these two distinguished gentlemen and didn't ask about Afghanistan. As you know, flights have stopped. There's a challenge with enduring welcome. I just want to hear from both of you. What do you think the future holds for our friends in Afghanistan, both here at home and there in country?
Sure. So I bitterly regret the fact that we didn't get everybody out we wanted to get out, that we broke trust with people that remained behind in Afghanistan that fought alongside of us. I think about that every day. I believe that Afghanistan is continuing a negative descent into a very bad place. And I see very few things that indicate to me it's going to get better in the short term. So I am not optimistic about the future of Afghanistan for the next few years. And I think we can, there's a lot out there to justify the position that I've taken.
A quick John McCain story. I was in Vietnam with him for, I think, the last time he was there. He gave us a tour of the prison, the Hanoi Hilton, where he was captured. It's amazing what a celebrity he is there. It's just absolutely incredible, right? And he bombed their city, okay? But he's a celebrity, which speaks enormously to the diplomatic progress we've made with Vietnam, and that's incredibly important vis-a-vis China, by the way. It also speaks to his personal role in that successful diplomacy. As you're standing there in this room, he talked about how to this group of members of Congress, but also Vietnamese and American tourists who just happened to be there at the same time. He talked about how proud he was as a veteran of the war to now serve in Congress. And then he very flatteringly pointed out, he said, and look, there's a new generation of war veterans who were representing Congress now. And he pointed to me and Mike Gallagher and said, like those two jackasses in the back row. I think jackass is his term for Marines. But next, he said much more movingly, he introduced Representative Stephanie Murphy, who is the first child of Vietnamese boat people to serve in Congress. And the pride that he showed when he was introducing her, I think just speaks not only to his commitment to Vietnam and this transformation, but to the ongoing human rights work that Cindy and others are doing. And you know, that's really what this is about at the end of the day. So what would I say? I would say with Afghanistan, we are in a bad place. I'm not terribly optimistic. It's going to take some real principled leadership from people like John McCain. And of course, right now, what we really need is Republicans like John McCain to step up and show the personal commitment to these Afghan and American heroes that they've shown to us.
We're just about out of time. We have like 20 seconds left. Can you do like a 10-second question? Pressure. That's a lot of pressure, man.
Hi, thank you so much for this discussion. My name is Anais. I want to go back to the question on Gaza and the fact that the food cannot enter the area. What can the United States do to ensure that Palestinians have access to humanitarian aid for food?
I think we're talking to the government of Israel right now. I think it's a complex problem because it's been brought out in the discussion here today. All that food is not necessarily going to the Palestinians. It's going to other nefarious reasons as well. So it's not a very easy solution. I would hope we're going to continue to put pressure on Israel to allow food to go in there. We have limited pressure on Israel in order to make them do that. I wish I had a better answer for you. I don't.
It's the same thing we were talking about here last year. You know, how does the Biden administration then put pressure to get food and aid into Gaza? I just want to take 1 second, I know we're out of time, and just say I've been lucky. This is my second year at the McCain Forum. I'm a repeat offender, as Evelyn was saying earlier. And I just have to say, I am so struck by the tone this year at the forum and how it is a difficult time to speak out in this political climate. And we have people who are coming here like these two and standing here on stage, sitting on stage, and giving us honest, candid conversation about difficult issues despite the climate. And I feel like that is just this keeping in so much with the spirit of Senator McCain, not being afraid to speak out, not being afraid if it was going to hurt you politically. And I am really so thankful to be here, and I'm so honored to be a repeat offender. So thank you both so much for being here today.